The morning sky over Kepler Prime was beautiful. 3 suns cast rainbow light across the crystal cities, where the Zentari people lived in peace. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the balcony of the embassy building, watching children play in the gardens below. Their crystalline skins sparkled in the sunlight as they laughed and ran between the flowering trees. Jake had been on this world for 6 months as Earth's diplomatic representative. The Zentari were gentle people who had never known war. They grew their cities like living things, shaping crystal formations that hummed with soft music when the wind blew through them. It was the most peaceful place Jake had ever seen. "Captain, we're getting some strange readings on the long-range scanners," called Lieutenant Amy Chen from inside the embassy. She was Jake's communications officer, a sharp woman with quick reflexes and a keen mind for technology. Jake walked back inside where Amy stood at the main console. Sergeant Kyle Rodriguez was cleaning his rifle in the corner, a habit he had picked up during his years as a Marine. Corporal Lisa Park sat at another station, monitoring local news feeds and keeping track of embassy security. "What kind of readings?" Jake asked, looking over Amy's shoulder at the display screen. "Multiple contacts jumping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. Big ones, really big ones." Amy's fingers danced across the controls, trying to get a clearer picture. "I count at least 50 ships, maybe more. They're not responding to any communication attempts." Jake felt a cold knot form in his stomach. In all his years as a diplomat and former military officer, he had learned to trust his instincts. Something was very wrong. "Get me Elder Vexthera on the line," he ordered. The elderly Zentari leader was the closest thing this world had to a government official, though the Zentari barely understood the concept of authority. They lived in harmony, making decisions together through gentle discussion and consensus. Within minutes, the holographic image of Elder Vexthera appeared in the room. The old Zenthari's crystal skin was dim with worry. Its usual bright glow faded to a dull silver. "Captain Morrison, we have detected the ships as well. Our astronomers say they are moving toward our world at great speed. We have never seen vessels of such size and design." The elder's voice carried the musical quality that all Zenthari possessed, but now it trembled with fear. "Have you tried to contact them?" Jake asked. "We have sent greetings in all known languages. They do not respond." "Captain, there is something else. Our historical archives contain references to ships like these. They belong to an empire that once ruled much of this galaxy. The Vortak." Jake had heard whispers of the Vortak during his travels. Ancient stories spoke of a militaristic race that had conquered and destroyed countless civilizations thousands of years ago, then mysteriously disappeared. Most people thought they were just legends. "Elder, I need you to evacuate the cities immediately. Get everyone underground, into the deepest shelters you have." The Zenthari leader's image flickered as the transmission became unstable. "Captain, we have no weapons, no defenses. We are a peaceful people. If these Vortak have truly returned..." The transmission cut off as massive shapes began to blot out the 3 suns. Jake rushed back to the balcony and looked up to see enormous warships descending through the atmosphere. They were dark, angular vessels covered in weapon arrays and armor plating. Each ship was easily 10 times larger than Earth's biggest warship. "Kyle, Lisa, grab your gear. Amy, try to reach our ship," Jake shouted as he ran back inside. Amy's face was pale as she looked up from her console. "The USS Hartford is gone, sir. I'm reading debris in orbit. They must have destroyed her as soon as the fleet arrived." Lisa was already strapping on her combat vest and checking her weapons. "So we're stuck here." Kyle shouldered his rifle and grabbed extra ammunition. "Well, at least we won't die of boredom." The first explosions began to rock the city. Through the embassy windows, Jake could see the beautiful crystal spires starting to crack and crumble under the bombardment. The Vortak were not trying to conquer this world. They were trying to destroy it completely. In the distance, Jake could see massive landing craft touching down in the main plaza. Armored soldiers poured out, their weapons firing at anything that moved. The few Zenthari who had not made it to the shelters were cut down without mercy. "They're killing everyone," Amy whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of destruction. Jake checked his sidearm and looked at his team. 3 humans against an army of alien invaders. The odds were impossible, but he had not become a captain by accepting defeat. "Listen up. We can't save this world, but we can make them pay for what they're doing. We know this city better than they do. We can hit their patrols, rescue civilians, and cause enough trouble to keep them busy." Lisa nodded grimly. "Guerrilla warfare. Make them afraid to turn their backs." "Exactly. Amy, try to get a message out on the emergency frequencies. Let Earth know what happened here. As the embassy building shook from another explosion, Jake led his team out through the back entrance. The crystal gardens that had been so beautiful that morning were now smoking ruins. Bodies of Zenthari civilians lay scattered among the broken flowers. The first Vortak patrol they encountered was a group of 6 soldiers searching through the rubble of a collapsed building. The aliens were tall and thin, with gray skin and red eyes that glowed in the dim light. Their armor was black and covered with sharp spikes. Jake signaled his team to take positions. They waited until the patrol was bunched together, then opened fire with their human weapons. The Vortak soldiers fell quickly, caught completely by surprise. They had expected no resistance from the peaceful Zenthari. Take their weapons and ammunition, Jake ordered. We're going to need everything we can get. As they moved through the ruined city, they found small groups of Zenthari hiding in the underground passages. Jake's team helped guide them to safer hiding places deeper in the tunnel system. Many of the crystal-skinned people were injured and some were too scared to move. Elder Vexithara found them in one of the deeper tunnels. The old Zenthari's glow was almost completely gone, making him nearly invisible in the darkness. Captain, why do you risk your lives for us? Your people are not from this world. You could try to escape. Jake looked at the frightened faces around him, both human and Zenthari. Because it's the right thing to do. Nobody deserves to die like this. Over the next several hours, Jake's team conducted a series of hit-and-run attacks on Vortak positions. They destroyed supply convoys, sabotaged communication equipment, and rescued dozens of civilians. The enemy began to realize they were facing something they had not expected: humans who refused to give up. As night fell over the burning city, Jake set up Amy's emergency transmitter in the ruins of the old observatory. The message he sent was simple but desperate. This is Captain Jake Morrison of Earth. We're on Kepler Prime under attack by an enemy called the Vortak. They're committing genocide. If anyone can hear this message, we need help. We're not going to let these monsters win. Morrison out. The signal traveled out into space, carrying humanity's first cry for help in what would become the greatest war the galaxy had ever seen. 6 months before the attack on Kepler Prime, Admiral Helen Carter sat in her office at Earth's United Defense Command headquarters. The room was filled with reports and intelligence, files that painted a disturbing picture of what was happening in the outer regions of the galaxy. Helen was a veteran officer who had spent most of her career preparing for threats that might never come. She had short gray hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. At 55, she had seen humanity grow from a single world species to a member of the galactic community. But she had never forgotten that the universe was a dangerous place. Admiral, we have another report from the refugee camps near Proxima Station, said her aide, Commander Robert Kim. He placed a datapad on her desk with a worried expression. Helen picked up the pad and read through the latest intelligence. More stories of entire species being wiped out by unknown attackers, whole star systems going dark, millions of refugees fleeing toward the galactic rim with tales of gray-skinned soldiers and massive warships. The patterns are becoming clearer, Helen said, pulling up a holographic star map. Red dots marked systems that had gone silent over the past 5 years. Someone is conducting a systematic campaign of genocide out there. Robert nodded. The refugees keep mentioning the same name. Vortak. According to our xenoarchaeologists, that was an ancient empire that disappeared thousands of years ago. Maybe they didn't disappear. Maybe they just went somewhere to build up their forces. Helen stood and walked to the window overlooking the bustling spaceport below. Ships from dozens of different worlds came and went, carrying trade goods and diplomats. It was a peaceful scene that might not last much longer. Admiral, there's something else. We've been monitoring subspace communications, and we're picking up coded military transmissions from the direction of the attacks. Someone is coordinating these strikes. Helen turned back to her desk and activated her secure communicator. Get me General Patricia Hayes at the Marine Command and Colonel Ben Torres from the Orbital Drop Division. Within minutes, both officers appeared as holograms in the office. General Hayes was a tough woman in her 40s who had earned her rank leading peacekeeping missions on frontier worlds. Colonel Torres was younger, a specialist in rapid deployment tactics who had trained some of Earth's most elite soldiers. I'm authorizing Operation Falling Star, Helen announced. Both officers straightened at the mention of the classified plan they had been developing for months. Ma'am, are you sure? We'll be committing almost our entire rapid response fleet. General Hayes said. The intelligence reports are clear. Someone is committing genocide on a massive scale, and they're getting closer to human space every month. We can either wait for them to come to us, or we can go find them first. Colonel Torres leaned forward. What's our primary objective? Find these Vortok, engage them, and make it clear that humanity will not stand by while innocent people are murdered. Helen brought up detailed tactical displays. Ben, I want your Sky Devils ready for immediate deployment. Patricia, coordinate with the Navy to get our stealth ships in position. The next few weeks saw frantic activity throughout Earth's military installations. Colonel Torres worked with Major Susan Blake, commander of the elite reconnaissance unit known as Ghost Squadron, to prepare special operations teams. Commander Alex Stone supervised the final testing of the experimental warship USS Valkyrie, which used new quantum drive technology that could jump directly into planetary atmospheres. The USS Valkyrie was humanity's most advanced warship, incorporating technology learned from 20 years of contact with other species. Its quantum engines could bend space-time, allowing it to appear anywhere within a star system almost instantly. The ship's weapons systems combined human engineering with alien energy sources, creating firepower that surprised even its designers. Major Blake's Ghost Squadron consisted of soldiers trained in infiltration, sabotage, and reconnaissance behind enemy lines. Each member could operate alone for weeks in hostile territory, gathering intelligence and striking at enemy weak points. They were equipped with advanced camouflage systems and weapons designed for silent elimination of targets. Colonel Torres's Sky Devils specialized in orbital drops into combat zones. They could deploy from high orbit directly onto enemy positions using individual drop pods that protected them during atmospheric entry. Each soldier was trained to fight alone if necessary, but they worked best as coordinated teams striking multiple targets simultaneously. The human fleet that Admiral Carter assembled was unlike anything Earth had ever built before. Massive carrier ships could deploy thousands of soldiers anywhere in the galaxy. Stealth corvettes could slip past enemy defenses to gather intelligence. Heavy cruisers provided fire support with weapons that could crack planetary shields. Commander Stone ran final tests on the USS Valkyrie's systems while his crew prepared for combat. The ship's quantum drives had never been used in actual battle conditions, but simulations showed they could give human forces a decisive advantage in surprise attacks. How are the new targeting systems working? Stone asked his weapons officer, Lieutenant Rachel Kim. Better than expected, sir. The quantum sensors can lock onto targets even when they're hidden behind energy shields. We should be able to hit enemy command ships before they know we're there. As the preparations continued, reports from the outer regions grew worse. Entire refugee fleets were disappearing. The few survivors who made it to human space told stories of gray-skinned soldiers who showed no mercy to civilians. Children, elderly, wounded. None were spared in the systematic extermination campaigns. Dr. Sarah Martinez, Earth's leading expert on xenoarchaeology, was brought in to brief the military commanders on what humanity might be facing. The Vortok Empire was one of the most militaristic civilizations in galactic history, she explained during a secure briefing. They believed that only the strongest species deserved to survive. According to ancient records, they conquered hundreds of worlds before vanishing about 3,000 years ago. What made them disappear the first time? Admiral Carter asked. That's the mystery. All records from that period are incomplete, but it appears they simply withdrew from all their conquered territories overnight. Some theories suggest they were preparing for a return, building up their forces in hidden locations. General Hayes studied the historical data. If they've had 3,000 years to prepare, they'll have weapons and tactics we can't imagine. True, but they'll also be fighting the same way they did thousands of years ago. Human military doctrine emphasizes adaptability and innovation. That might give us an edge. The briefing was interrupted by an urgent communication from the Deep Space Monitoring Station. A young communications officer appeared on the main screen, his face pale with shock. Admiral Carter, we're receiving an emergency transmission from the Kepler system. It's from Captain Jake Morrison of the Diplomatic Corps. The recorded message played in the silent briefing room. Jake's voice was steady despite the sound of explosions and weapons fire in the background. This is Captain Jake Morrison of Earth. We're on Kepler Prime, under attack by an enemy called the Vortok. They're committing genocide. If anyone can hear this message, we need help. We're not going to let these monsters win. Morrison out. The room was quiet for several seconds after the message ended. Then Admiral Carter stood and looked at each of her officers. Ladies and gentlemen, Operation Falling Star is now active. Get our people to Kepler Prime as fast as possible. It's time to show the galaxy what happens when you threaten innocent lives. Colonel Torres was the first to respond. How long do we have to prep? The fleet leaves in 6 hours. Anyone who can't be ready by then stays behind. As the officers rushed to their commands, Admiral Carter remained in the briefing room, looking at the star map that showed the location of Kepler Prime. Jake Morrison and his team were fighting impossible odds, holding out against an enemy that had conquered half the galaxy. "Hold on, Jake," she whispered. "Help is coming." Across Earth, military bases erupted into activity. Ships lifted off from launch pads, carrying soldiers and supplies toward a battle that would determine the fate of countless species. Humanity was about to announce itself as a force for justice in a galaxy that had forgotten the meaning of hope. 2 weeks had passed since the attack on Kepler Prime began. Captain Jake Morrison crouched in the ruins of what had once been a beautiful crystal cathedral, watching a Vortak patrol march through the rubble-filled streets below. His small team had grown from 3 humans to nearly 50 fighters, including Xanthari civilians who had learned to use captured weapons. Jake's face was covered in dirt and dried blood. His uniform was torn and stained, but his eyes still held the determination that had kept his people fighting against impossible odds. Beside him, Sergeant Kyle Rodriguez adjusted the scope on a Vortak energy rifle they had taken from a dead enemy soldier. "How many do you count?" Jake whispered. 12 in the main group, 2 scouts on the flanks," Kyle replied. "Same pattern they've been using all week. These guys never change their tactics." Lieutenant Amy Chen crawled up beside them, her communications equipment strapped to her back. "I'm still getting that signal from the outer system. Someone's coming, but they're staying just outside scanner range." For 3 days, Amy had been detecting faint energy signatures at the edge of the Kepler system. The readings were too weak to identify, but they suggested a large fleet holding position beyond the planet's sensor net. Jake hoped it was human ships, but he couldn't be sure. In the distance, the massive Vortak dreadnoughts continued their slow bombardment of the planet's surface. The aliens were in no hurry to finish their extermination. They seemed to enjoy watching the crystal cities crumble piece by piece. Elder Vexthera emerged from a hidden tunnel entrance, his crystal skin now permanently dim from weeks of hiding underground. Despite his fear, the old Xanthari had become a skilled resistance fighter, helping to coordinate rescue missions and supply runs. "Captain Morrison, our scouts report that the Vortak are moving their command center to the main spaceport. They appear to be preparing something large." Jake nodded. He had seen the enemy bringing in heavy equipment and additional troops over the past few days. Intelligence gathered from captured communications suggested they were setting up world-cracking weapons that could destroy the planet's core. "How long do we have?" "Perhaps 1 day, maybe 2, Vexthera said sadly. "I am sorry we could not provide you with a better world to defend." Jake put his hand on the elder's shoulder. "You gave us something worth fighting for. That's more than enough." Suddenly, Amy's communication equipment began beeping frantically. She quickly activated the receiver and listened to the incoming transmission, her eyes growing wide with excitement. "Jake, it's Admiral Carter. The fleet is here." High above the planet's surface, space suddenly filled with human warships emerging from hyperspace. Admiral Helen Carter stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching as dozens of ships took combat positions around the Vortak fleet. The enemy had been caught completely by surprise. Their massive dreadnoughts were powerful but slow to react. The human fleet used this advantage, with smaller ships darting between the alien vessels like angry wasps around sleeping giants. Commander Alex Stone piloted the USS Valkyrie directly into the planet's atmosphere, using the ship's quantum drives to phase in and out of normal space-time. The experimental vessel appeared and disappeared like a ghost, striking at Vortak ground installations before vanishing again. "Target the command ships first," Admiral Carter ordered. "Cut off their communications and coordination." The space battle was unlike anything the Vortak had ever experienced. For thousands of years, they had fought species that used traditional military tactics, forming orderly battle lines and trading shots at long range. The humans fought like wild animals, using every trick and unconventional strategy they could devise. Colonel Ben Torres led the first wave of orbital drops, his sky devils descending through the atmosphere in individual pods that screamed like falling meteors. The drop pods were designed to penetrate enemy defenses and deliver soldiers directly onto target sites. "Remember, we have people on the ground already," Torres reminded his troops over the communication system. "Link up with Captain Morrison's team and coordinate our attacks." The Sky Devils landed in a perfect pattern around the Vortak command center at the spaceport. Each soldier emerged from their pod ready for combat, carrying weapons and equipment specially designed for this type of assault. Major Susan Blake's Ghost Squadron had infiltrated the planet hours earlier using stealth ships. They had been gathering intelligence and preparing sabotage operations while waiting for the main attack to begin. Now they struck at key targets throughout the city, causing confusion and panic among the enemy forces. Jake Morrison heard the sound of human drop pods impacting around the city and felt hope rise in his chest for the first time in weeks. He activated his communicator and broadcast on all human frequencies. "This is Captain Morrison. We're in Sector 7 of the Old City, with approximately 50 friendly fighters. We have detailed intelligence on enemy positions and patrol patterns." Colonel Torres's voice came back immediately. "Morrison, this is Torres. Outstanding work holding the line. We're linking up with your position in 10 minutes. The battle for Kepler Prime became a perfect example of human military coordination. Jake's resistance fighters provided local knowledge and intelligence while the Sky Devils brought heavy weapons and fresh troops. Major Blake's Ghost Squadron disrupted enemy communications and supply lines while Commander Stone's USS Valkyrie provided air support with surgical strikes. The Vortak found themselves fighting an enemy unlike any they had encountered before. Human soldiers appeared where they were not expected, used tactics that changed constantly, and showed a willingness to take risks that bordered on insanity. War Commander Kexvoth, the alien leader in charge of the Kepler Prime operation, watched his orderly invasion turn into chaos from his command ship in orbit. His forces had never faced an enemy that fought back effectively. "How are these humans able to coordinate so many different attack patterns?" he demanded of his subordinates. "Unknown, War Commander. Their communication methods are unlike anything in our databases. They appear to be adapting their tactics in real time based on battlefield conditions." On the planet's surface, human and Xanthari fighters worked together to push the Vortak forces back toward their landing sites. The crystal-skinned aliens had learned quickly from their human teachers, using hit-and-run tactics to strike at enemy patrols before disappearing into the underground tunnel networks. Elder Vexithara fought alongside Colonel Torres's troops, carrying a captured energy rifle and wearing improvised body armor made from Vortak equipment. The peaceful people of Kepler Prime had been transformed into warriors by necessity, but they had found courage they never knew they possessed. The turning point came when Major Blake's team successfully sabotaged the world-cracking weapons before they could be activated. The massive devices exploded in a chain reaction that destroyed the entire Vortak spaceport complex. "Command center is down," Blake reported over the communication network. "Enemy ground forces are in full retreat." In space, Admiral Carter's fleet had managed to destroy or disable most of the Vortak dreadnoughts. The surviving enemy ships began jumping to hyperspace, fleeing the system in disorder. War Commander Kexvoth was forced to make a decision he had never faced before: retreat from a battle he was losing. As his flagship prepared to jump to hyperspace, he transmitted a message to the human fleet. "This defeat means nothing, humans. The Vortak Empire has 1,000 fleets. We will return with forces that will darken your skies and burn your worlds to ash." Admiral Carter's response was broadcast not only to the retreating Vortak ships, but to monitoring stations throughout the galaxy. "We'll be ready for you, and next time we'll bring friends." As the last enemy ships disappeared into hyperspace, the defenders of Kepler Prime gathered in the ruins of the Crystal Cathedral, where Jake Morrison had made his desperate stand. Human soldiers stood side by side with Xanthari fighters, all of them exhausted but alive. Jake looked up at the sky where human ships were already beginning rescue and recovery operations. The three suns of Kepler Prime shone through the smoke and dust, casting rainbow light over the battle-scarred city. "Is it over?" Elder Vexithara asked. "This battle is over," Jake replied, "but I think the war is just beginning." Unknown to the defenders of Kepler Prime, their victory was already being discussed in refugee camps throughout the galaxy. For the first time in living memory, someone had successfully fought back against the Vortak Empire and won. The news spread like wildfire among the scattered survivors of 100 conquered worlds. Hope, which had been almost extinct, began to grow again in the hearts of the oppressed. 3 months after the liberation of Kepler Prime, the news of humanity's victory had spread throughout the galaxy like a wildfire. In refugee camps scattered across 100 worlds, people who had given up hope began to believe again. The impossible had happened. Someone had fought the Vortok Empire and won. Captain Julie Santos stood on the deck of the human cruiser USS Phoenix, looking down at the blue-green world of Aquaros below. The planet was almost entirely covered by oceans, home to the amphibious Delaney species who had lived in harmony with their water world for thousands of years. Now their cities lay in ruins beneath the waves, their people enslaved by Vortok overlords. "The intelligence reports are accurate," said Commander Mark Johnson, Julie's second-in-command. "The Vortok have been using Delaney slave labor to mine rare minerals from the ocean floor. The mining operations are poisoning the water and killing marine life." Julie studied the data displays showing underwater cities that had once sparkled with bioluminescent beauty. The Delaney were natural swimmers who could breathe both air and water through specialized gills. They had built their civilization in harmony with ocean life, creating cities that looked like coral reefs, but were actually sophisticated urban centers. "How many survivors are we looking at?" "Maybe 2 million scattered across the planet. The Vortok killed most of the population in the first wave, kept the rest as workers. Our reconnaissance teams have made contact with several resistance groups hiding in deep ocean trenches. The USS Phoenix was part of Admiral Carter's expanded fleet, now organized into rapid response groups that could strike at Vortok positions throughout the galaxy. Each group consisted of specialized ships and troops, trained for different environments and enemy tactics. Julie's team included Lieutenant Sam Rivera, an expert in underwater combat operations, and Sergeant Maria Lopez, whose specialty was training civilian populations in guerrilla warfare. They had volunteered for the dangerous mission of liberating Aquaros because they understood that each victory would inspire other conquered peoples to fight back. "Take us down to the surface," Julie ordered. "Let's go meet our new allies." The Phoenix descended through Aquaros's thick atmosphere and landed on one of the few remaining surface platforms. The air was heavy with moisture and carried the smell of dead sea life from the poisoned oceans below. In the distance, massive Vortok mining platforms dominated the horizon like mechanical islands. Lieutenant Rivera led the first contact team down into the underwater approaches to the platform. They used specially designed breathing equipment that allowed them to operate in the Delaney's aquatic environment. The water was murky and filled with chemical pollutants from the mining operations. They found the Delaney resistance fighters hiding in a network of underwater caves that had once been beautiful coral gardens. The amphibious aliens were tall and graceful, with smooth skin that changed color to match their surroundings. Their large eyes were adapted for seeing in deep water, and their webbed hands and feet made them incredibly fast swimmers. The Delaney leader introduced herself as Coral Singer Naya, though she explained that her true name was a complex series of harmonic sounds that humans couldn't pronounce. Her skin was a deep blue-green color marked with scars from Vortok weapons. "We have heard the stories from the outer worlds," Naya said, her voice carrying the musical quality that all Delaney possessed. "They say humans fell from the sky like avenging spirits to free the crystal people of Kepler Prime. We're here to help you do the same thing," Julie replied through her communication system. "But we can't do it alone. We need local knowledge, fighters who know this world and can teach us how to operate in your environment." Over the following days, human soldiers worked closely with Delaney resistance fighters to plan coordinated strikes against the mining operations. The Delaney knew every current and trench in their home waters, while the humans brought weapons and tactics the Vortok had never encountered. Lieutenant Rivera was amazed by how quickly the Delaney adapted to human military techniques. "They're natural guerrilla fighters," he reported to Julie. "They can appear and disappear in the water like ghosts. The Vortok guards never see them coming." The first major operation targeted a mining platform in the Northern Ocean. Delaney swimmers approached underwater, while human soldiers provided cover fire from surface vessels. The attack was perfectly coordinated, with the amphibious allies disabling the platform's underwater supports, while the humans dealt with the guards and equipment above. Sergeant Lopez worked with groups of Delaney civilians, teaching them how to build improvised weapons and set up communication networks. She was impressed by their intelligence and dedication to freeing their world. They're not natural warriors like humans, she told Julie during one of their planning sessions. But they have something even more powerful. They're fighting for their home, their families, and their entire species. That kind of motivation makes people do impossible things. Meanwhile, on the other side of the galaxy, Lieutenant Commander Carlos Mendez was leading a different kind of liberation operation. The Tartarus system had been under Vortak control for 50 years. Its 3 worlds turned into massive slave labor camps where captured aliens worked in conditions that killed most within a few years. The dominant species in the Tartarus system was the Krixthak, insectoid aliens who looked like giant praying mantises, but possessed intelligence and technology that rivaled any species in the galaxy. Before the Vortak conquest, they had been known as skilled engineers and artists, who created beautiful structures from living metal. The Krixthak had a collective consciousness that allowed them to coordinate group actions with incredible precision. When human special forces arrived to make contact with the resistance, they found that the insectoid aliens had been planning a massive uprising, but lacked the weapons and outside support to make it successful. Commander Mendez met with the Krixthak resistance leader, a scarred veteran called Click Razor, who had survived decades of slavery by organizing secret networks among the worker groups. The insectoid's compound eyes gleamed with intelligence as he studied the human soldiers through the bars of his holding pen. "We have waited long for allies to arrive," Click Razor said, his words translated through electronic devices since the Krixthak communicated through complex clicking sounds. "Our people remember freedom. We will fight to taste it again." The plan for liberating the Tartarus system was more complex than previous operations because of the large number of prisoners and the heavy Vortak security presence. Mendez's team would have to strike simultaneously at dozens of prison camps, while the Krixthak coordinated uprisings throughout the worker populations. "The key is timing," Mendez explained to his officers. "If even one camp revolt fails, the Vortak will execute thousands of prisoners in retaliation. We get one chance to do this right." The liberation of Tartarus began at midnight system time. Human special forces struck at guard posts and communication centers while millions of Krixthak prisoners overwhelmed their captors through sheer numbers. The insectoid aliens had been planning this moment for decades, and their collective consciousness allowed them to coordinate the uprising with military precision. Click Razor led the assault on the main processing facility where new prisoners were brought for sorting and assignment to work details. The building was heavily defended, but the Krixthak attackers moved like a single organism, flowing around obstacles and striking at weak points with perfect coordination. Commander Mendez watched in amazement as the insectoid allies demonstrated tactics he had never seen before. "They fight like a single creature with a million bodies," he reported to Admiral Carter. "The Vortak don't have any experience dealing with this kind of coordinated mass action." Within hours, all 3 worlds in the Tartarus system were free. The Vortak garrison forces had been designed to control individual prisoners in small groups, not to deal with organized rebellion by entire populations. Most of the alien guards fled the system rather than face the fury of the liberated Krixthak. News of the simultaneous victories on Aquaros and Tartarus spread even faster than the original story from Kepler Prime. In refugee camps throughout the galaxy, people who had lost everything began to believe that freedom was possible again. The Vortak Empire, meanwhile, faced a crisis unlike anything in their long history of conquest. Vassal species who had served them for generations began to question whether their masters were truly invincible. Secret communications networks carried stories of human soldiers who fought with impossible courage and alien allies who refused to accept defeat. War Commander Kexavoth, who had been demoted after his failure at Kepler Prime, was called before the Supreme War Council on the Vortak homeworld. The massive chamber was filled with the Empire's highest military leaders, their red eyes glowing with anger in the dim light. "These humans are disrupting our entire pacification program," announced Supreme War Master Zethkoth, the Empire's highest military authority. 3 major operations have been defeated, and rebellion is spreading to systems we have controlled for decades. Kexavoth stood before the council, knowing that failure meant death. "Supreme War Master, the humans fight unlike any species we have encountered. They use tactics that change constantly, and they inspire other species. 6 months after the liberation of Kepler Prime, The galaxy had changed in ways no one could have imagined. What had begun as a single desperate battle had grown into a full-scale rebellion against the Vortok Empire. Admiral Helen Carter stood in the war room of her new flagship, the USS Liberty, surrounded by holographic displays showing the locations of 47 liberated worlds. The war room was a testament to the alliance that had formed between humanity and dozens of alien species. Zenthari crystal technology provided advanced communications. Delani bioengineering had improved ship hull designs, and Krixthak collective intelligence networks allowed for coordination across vast distances. The combination of human military innovation with alien expertise had created a fighting force unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. "Admiral, we're receiving reports from our deep space reconnaissance units," announced Commander Lisa Williams, Carter's new intelligence chief. "The Vortak are pulling back their forces from the outer worlds and consolidating around a massive installation in the Nexus sector." Carter studied the long-range sensor data with growing concern. The Nexus sector was deep in Vortok space, a region that had been off-limits to all other species for thousands of years. According to ancient records, it contained some kind of megastructure built around an artificial black hole. "What do we know about this installation?" Dr. Sarah Martinez, now serving as the Alliance's chief xenoarchaeologist, stepped forward with a data pad full of historical research. The Vortak built the Nexus Fortress during their first expansion period. It's essentially a giant weapons platform that uses the black hole's energy to power devices that can destroy entire star systems. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. If the Vortak were retreating to such a weapon, it meant they were preparing for something far worse than conventional warfare. Colonel Ben Torres, who had been promoted to general after the success of the liberation campaigns, leaned over the tactical display. "How many ships are we looking at?" "Our best estimate is over 2,000 Vortok vessels, including their entire remaining battle fleet," Commander Williams replied. "They're also bringing in vessels we've never seen before, ships that are easily 10 times larger than their standard dreadnoughts." Captain Jake Morrison, who had become something of a legend throughout the galaxy, entered the war room carrying the latest intelligence reports from the liberated worlds. His diplomatic mission had turned into a military command, and he now coordinated resistance activities across multiple star systems. "The situation is getting worse," Jake announced grimly. "Vortok forces are conducting scorched earth retreats, destroying everything they can't take with them. They're not just withdrawing, they're trying to eliminate anything that could be useful to us." Admiral Carter called up a galaxy-wide strategic map that showed the full scope of the conflict. Red indicators marked Vortok-controlled territory, blue showed liberated systems, and yellow indicated contested regions where fighting was still ongoing. "They're forcing us to make a choice," she said, after studying the display. "We can either continue liberating worlds one by one while they prepare their ultimate weapon, or we can take the fight directly to their stronghold." General Torres nodded grimly. "A direct assault on the Nexus Fortress would be the most dangerous military operation in galactic history. We'd be attacking an enemy stronghold with overwhelming firepower advantages. But if we don't stop them now, they'll activate whatever weapons they have hidden in that fortress," Jake added. "Based on the refugee reports, the Vortok have planet-killer technology that could sterilize entire sectors." The debate was interrupted by an urgent communication from Major Susan Blake, whose Ghost Squadron had been conducting deep reconnaissance missions in Vortok space. Her image appeared in the war room, transmitted from her stealth ship somewhere near the Nexus sector. "Admiral, I'm sending you the data we've collected on the Nexus Fortress. It's worse than we thought." Blake's face was pale with exhaustion and worry. "They're not just preparing to defend their position. They're getting ready to launch something called the Final Purge Protocol." The intelligence data that Blake transmitted painted a horrifying picture. The Nexus Fortress contained weapons that could cause stars to go supernova, destroy entire solar systems, and sterilize space across distances measured in hundreds of light years. If activated, the Final Purge Protocol would eliminate all life in the rebellious sectors, creating a dead zone around the remaining Vortok territory. Dr. Martinez studied the technical specifications with growing alarm. According to these readings, the weapon draws power directly from the black hole's accretion disk. It would have enough energy to destroy every star system within 100 light-year radius. "How long until they can activate it?" Admiral Carter asked. Based on the energy buildup patterns we're detecting, maybe 2 weeks, Blake replied. After that, it won't matter how many worlds we've liberated. There won't be anyone left to save. The war room erupted into urgent discussions as officers tried to develop strategies for dealing with an impossible situation. How do you attack a fortress that can destroy star systems? How do you fight an enemy that has weapons capable of killing trillions of people with the push of a button? Admiral Carter called for silence and looked around the room at the faces of humanity's best military minds, along with representatives from the allied species. The weight of the galaxy's future rested on the decisions they would make in the next few hours. We need to assemble the largest fleet in galactic history, she announced. Every ship, every soldier, every ally we can gather. This isn't just about liberating individual worlds anymore. This is about preventing the complete extermination of intelligent life in this region of the galaxy. Over the following week, ships began gathering at the secret staging area in the Sanctuary System, a hidden location that had become the unofficial capital of the Galactic Alliance. Vessels from dozens of species arrived daily, their crews united by a common determination to prevent genocide on an unimaginable scale. The Zenthari contributed their crystal ships, vessels grown rather than built that could regenerate damage during combat. Elder Vex Thera himself led a squadron of these living warships, his people having transformed from pacifists to determined warriors in the face of extinction. The Delani sent bioships that looked like giant sea creatures but were actually sophisticated weapons platforms. Captain Julie Santos worked with their commanders to develop underwater assault tactics that could be adapted for use in the vacuum of space. The Krixthak provided swarm fighters, small, fast ships that operated under collective consciousness control. Click-Razor, now serving as a general in the Alliance military, coordinated thousands of these vessels that could overwhelm enemy defenses through sheer numbers. Commander Alex Stone's USS Valkyrie had been joined by an entire squadron of quantum drive ships, experimental vessels that could phase in and out of normal space-time. These ships would be crucial for penetrating the Nexus Fortress's defensive systems. As the Allied fleet grew to over 5,000 ships, Admiral Carter found herself commanding a military force larger than most galactic empires. Representatives from 100 different species served on her staff, each bringing unique capabilities and perspectives to the coming battle. But even with such a massive fleet, the odds remained daunting. Intelligence reports suggested the Nexus Fortress was defended by fixed weapons platforms that could destroy entire fleets, energy shields that could deflect any known weapon, and the black hole itself, which would tear apart any ship that got too close. We're not just fighting for victory, Admiral Carter told the assembled fleet commanders during their final briefing. We're fighting for the right of intelligent life to exist in this galaxy. The Vortak have made it clear that they won't stop until every other species is extinct. Today, we make our stand. The fleet began its final approach to the Nexus sector, knowing that many of the ships and crews would not return, but they also knew that failure meant something far worse than death. It meant the end of hope itself. As the Allied Armada prepared for the greatest battle in galactic history, reconnaissance reports began arriving from the Nexus Fortress. The Vortak had indeed assembled their entire remaining military force, but they had also activated ancient weapons that defied understanding. Energy readings suggested power levels that could crack planets and tear holes in space itself. Supreme War Master Zethkoth waited in his command center deep within the fortress, surrounded by controls that could unleash destruction beyond imagination. He had spent his entire life believing that the Vortak were destined to rule over a purified galaxy. Now these humans and their allies threatened to destroy everything his species had worked toward for millennia. Let them come, he whispered to himself as he watched the approaching fleet on his displays. They will learn that some powers are too great for lesser species to comprehend. The final confrontation was about to begin, and the fate of countless worlds hung in the balance. The Allied fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Nexus sector and found themselves facing something that defied comprehension. The Nexus Fortress was not just a military installation, it was an entire artificial world built around a black hole, its massive structure drawing power from the swirling accretion disk of superheated matter. Admiral Helen Carter stood on the bridge of the USS Liberty, staring at the tactical displays that showed the true scope of what they were facing. The fortress was easily the size of a small moon, its dark metal surface covered with weapon emplacements that could destroy entire fleets. Around it orbited defensive platforms, each one larger than Earth's biggest space stations. "My God," whispered Commander Lisa Williams. "How is something like that even possible?" Dr. Sarah Martinez studied the sensor readings with a mixture of awe and terror. The engineering required to build a stable structure around a black hole. The Vortak must have had technology thousands of years ago that we're only beginning to understand now. The fortress was surrounded by the largest Vortak fleet ever assembled. Over 2,000 ships formed defensive formations that stretched across millions of kilometers of space. At the center of the enemy fleet were vessels that dwarfed even the massive dreadnoughts, super battleships that looked more like mobile space stations than traditional warships. General Ben Torres activated the fleet-wide communication system to address all the Allied commanders. "Remember, our primary objective is to disable the final purge weapon before it can be activated. Everything else is secondary to stopping that device, Major." Susan Blake's Ghost Squadron had managed to infiltrate the outer defensive perimeter and was transmitting detailed intelligence about the fortress's layout. Her stealth ships moved like shadows between the massive Vortak vessels, gathering crucial data about weak points and defensive systems. The weapon control center is located in the fortress's core, right next to the black hole itself, Blake reported. The only way to reach it is through a series of heavily defended corridors that lead directly into the heart of the structure. Captain Jake Morrison, now commanding a mixed squadron of human and Xanthari ships, studied the tactical situation with growing concern. "Even if we can punch through their defenses, someone will have to get inside that fortress and fight their way to the control center. It's a suicide mission." Admiral Carter looked around the bridge at her officers, seeing the same determination in their eyes that had carried them through every battle so far. They all understood the stakes. Failure meant the extinction of intelligent life across a huge portion of the galaxy. "Then we make sure it's not suicide," she said firmly. "We coordinate our attack to give the infiltration team the best possible chance of success." The battle began with a coordinated assault by the Krixthak swarm fighters. Thousands of small ships operating under collective consciousness control rushed toward the Vortak defensive lines like a cloud of angry insects. The enemy weapons platforms opened fire, destroying hundreds of the tiny vessels, but there were simply too many to stop them all. Click Razor coordinated the swarm attack from his command ship, his compound eyes tracking dozens of tactical displays simultaneously. The Krixthak fighters didn't try to engage the large enemy ships directly. Instead, they targeted sensor arrays, communication equipment, and weapon control systems. "Create chaos," he ordered his pilots. "Make them unable to coordinate their defenses." While the swarm fighters disrupted the enemy formations, the main Allied fleet moved into attack position. Xanthari crystal ships sang harmonic battle songs as their living hulls regenerated damage from Vortak energy weapons. Delani bioships flowed through space like giant sea creatures, their organic weapons firing projectiles that could penetrate even the strongest armor. Commander Alex Stone's Quantum Drive Squadron appeared and disappeared throughout the battlefield like ghosts, striking at enemy command ships before vanishing back into phase space. The USS Valkyrie materialized inside the enemy formation, fired a devastating barrage at a Vortak super battleship, then phased out before the return fire could reach it. But despite the Allied fleet's innovative tactics and determination, the Nexus Fortress's defenses were holding. Massive energy beams swept across space, destroying entire squadrons of Allied ships. The fortress's shields deflected even the most powerful weapons, and the Vortak fleet began pressing forward in a counterattack that threatened to overwhelm the Allied forces. Supreme War Master Zethkoth watched the battle from his command center deep within the fortress, his red eyes glowing with satisfaction. The humans and their allies were fighting bravely, but they could not overcome the accumulated military might of the Vortak Empire. "Activate the final purge weapon," he commanded his subordinates. "Let us end this rebellion once and for all." Deep in the fortress's core, ancient machines began to awaken. Power drawn directly from the black hole's accretion disk flowed through conduits that had been built millennia ago. The weapon that could sterilize entire sectors of space began charging for its first firing sequence. Admiral Carter watched the energy readings spike on her instruments and realized they were running out of time. "All ships concentrate fire on the fortress's main structure. We have to break through their defenses now." The Allied fleet converged on the Nexus Fortress in a desperate final assault. Ships of every size and design threw themselves at the enemy defenses, their crews knowing that this was their last chance to prevent galactic genocide. Colonel Torres led his Sky Devils in a boarding assault on one of the outer defensive platforms, hoping to create a gap in the enemy's defenses. His soldiers fought through heavily defended corridors, facing Vortak warriors who had been bred for combat and knew no fear. Captain Julie Santos coordinated with Delaney swimmers who had been specially trained for zero-gravity combat. They moved through the damaged sections of enemy ships like sharks through water, striking at vital systems and creating havoc among the Vortak crews. But it was Captain Jake Morrison who made the crucial breakthrough. Leading a mixed team of human marines and Zenthari warriors, he managed to reach the fortress's outer hull and plant explosive charges that created a breach in the defensive shields. "This is Morrison," he transmitted to the fleet. "We've got a hole in their defenses, but it won't stay open long. Someone needs to get inside now." Major Blake's Ghost Squadron was already moving toward the breach, their stealth ships loaded with commandos trained for exactly this type of mission. But as they approached the fortress, massive defensive turrets swiveled toward them, preparing to fire. "I'll draw their fire," Commander Stone announced, bringing the USS Valkyrie out of phase space directly between the Ghost Squadron and the enemy guns. The experimental ship's shields flared as Vortak energy beams hammered against them. But Stone held position long enough for Blake's team to slip through the breach. The USS Valkyrie's shields finally collapsed under the concentrated fire, and the ship began breaking apart. Commander Stone transmitted a final message to the fleet. "Tell my family I was proud to serve with all of you." The ship's quantum drives overloaded in a spectacular explosion that created a temporary rift in space-time, disabling several of the fortress's defensive systems and giving the Allied fleet a precious few minutes of reduced enemy fire. Major Blake's commandos fought their way through the fortress's interior, facing resistance from Vortak security forces who had never expected their stronghold to be breached. The corridors were filled with alien architecture that seemed designed to confuse and disorient intruders. "The control center should be just ahead," Blake told her team as they reached a massive chamber filled with ancient machinery. The sound of the black hole's gravitational forces was audible through the hull, a deep, ominous rumbling that seemed to shake the very atoms of matter. As they approached the final purge weapons control systems, Blake realized they were not alone in the chamber. Supreme War Master Zethkoth waited for them, surrounded by his elite guards and standing before the weapon controls that could destroy 100 star systems. "So, the humans have finally reached the heart of our fortress," the Vortak leader said, his voice carrying the arrogance of a species that had ruled through fear for millennia. "You cannot stop what has already begun. The final purge will cleanse this galaxy of your contaminating presence." Blake looked at the weapon controls and saw that the charging sequence was nearly complete. They had minutes, maybe less, before the device would be ready to fire. The fate of countless worlds hung in the balance, and everything depended on what happened in the next few moments. "We'll see about that," she replied, signaling her team to prepare for the final assault. The last battle for the future of galactic civilization was about to begin in the heart of an artificial world built around a black hole, where ancient weapons waited to unleash destruction beyond imagination. In the control chamber at the heart of the Nexus Fortress, Major Susan Blake faced Supreme War Master Zethkoth across a room filled with ancient technology that hummed with barely contained power. The final purge weapon was minutes away from activation, its charging systems drawing energy directly from the black hole that roared outside the fortress walls. Blake's commando team spread out around the chamber, taking cover behind massive control consoles that looked more like monuments than machines. Each piece of equipment was the size of a building, covered with alien symbols that pulsed with red light as the weapon systems came online. "You understand nothing of what you face, human," Zethkoth said, his red eyes glowing with fanatical certainty. "The Vortak Empire has ruled this galaxy for thousands of years. We have purged dozens of inferior species to create a perfect order. Your rebellion is merely a temporary disruption." Blake checked the timer on her tactical display. 3 minutes until the weapon reached full charge. Around her, the battle continued to rage as her commandos exchanged fire with Vortak guards who had positioned themselves throughout the vast chamber. "Your perfect order is built on genocide," Blake replied, moving from cover to cover as energy bolts sizzled past her head. "We've seen what you do to peaceful species. You don't create order, you create death." The Vortak leader laughed, a sound like grinding metal. Death is the natural state of the universe. Only the strongest deserve to survive, and we are the strongest. When the final purge activates, every world that has rebelled against us will be sterilized. Your precious alliance will be nothing but radioactive dust. On the fortress's outer hull, Captain Jake Morrison was leading a desperate assault on the weapon's external power conduits. His mixed team of human marines and Xanthari warriors fought through corridors filled with automated defense systems and Vortak security forces. The power couplings are just ahead, called Elder Vexthera, who had insisted on joining the assault despite his advanced age. The Xanthari leader's crystal skin glowed with determination as he used captured alien weapons to clear a path through enemy resistance. Jake studied the massive conduits that carried power from the black hole's accretion disk to the weapon systems. Each conduit was heavily armored and protected by energy shields, but he could see weak points where explosives might be effective. If we can cut the power flow, it might buy Blake more time to shut down the weapon from inside, Jake told his team. They began placing charges on the conduits while enemy fire rained down around them. Meanwhile, in space around the fortress, Admiral Carter's fleet was fighting the largest naval battle in galactic history. Despite heavy losses, the Allied ships continued to press their attack, knowing that every second they could delay the Vortak forces might be crucial to the mission's success. General Torres led what remained of his Sky Devils in boarding actions against the Vortak super battleships. His soldiers fought room by room through enemy vessels, trying to disable as many ships as possible before the final purge weapon could fire. The Krixthak swarm fighters had suffered massive casualties, but ClickRazor continued to coordinate attacks with the survivors. His collective consciousness allowed him to process tactical information from thousands of sources simultaneously, finding patterns and weaknesses in the enemy formations that individual commanders would miss. Allied Command, "This is ClickRazor," he transmitted to Admiral Carter. "My forces are detecting energy buildups in the fortress's core systems. The weapon will be ready to fire in approximately 90 seconds. Carter felt her heart sink as she realized how little time they had left. The battle was far from over, and her fleet was still taking heavy casualties from the fortress's defensive systems. Back in the control chamber, Major Blake was running out of options. Her team had managed to eliminate most of the Vortak guards, but Zethkoth himself stood directly in front of the weapon's activation controls, protected by personal shields that deflected their weapons fire. 60 seconds until activation, the War Master announced triumphantly. Soon the light of 100 dying suns will announce the beginning of a new age of Vortak supremacy. Blake looked around the chamber desperately, searching for some way to reach the controls or disable the weapon systems. The ancient machinery was beyond her understanding, built with technology that predated human civilization by millennia. Then she noticed something that the Vortak leader had overlooked. The weapons control systems were connected to the fortress's main computer network, which included life support and artificial gravity. If she could overload those systems, it might create enough of a distraction to reach the activation controls. "Cover me," she told her remaining team members, then sprinted toward a secondary control panel that monitored the fortress's environmental systems. Her fingers flew over the alien controls. Using techniques she had learned from captured Vortak technology, she began shutting down life support systems throughout the fortress, causing emergency alarms to sound and emergency lighting to activate. The distraction worked. Zethkoth turned away from the weapon controls to check what was happening with his fortress's systems, and in that moment, Blake launched herself across the chamber toward the final purge activation panel. The War Master realized what was happening and spun around, his personal weapon charging with deadly energy, but he was a fraction of a second too slow. Blake's hands reached the alien controls just as Jake Morrison's explosives detonated on the fortress's hull. The power conduits erupted in chains of explosions that sent shockwaves through the entire structure, causing the lights to flicker and the weapon charging sequence to stutter. "No," Zethkoth roared, firing his weapon at Blake even as she began shutting down the final purge systems. The energy bolt struck Blake in the back, sending her crashing into the control panel. Pain shot through her body, but she forced herself to keep working, her hands moving over controls that she barely understood. "The weapon systems are destabilizing," she managed to gasp into her communicator. I'm trying to shut them down, but I don't know if I can complete the sequence. Outside the fortress, the explosions from Jake's sabotage operation had created a cascade of power failures throughout the massive structure. Several defensive platforms went dark, and the fortress's shields began to fluctuate. Admiral Carter seized the opportunity to press her attack. All ships, concentrate fire on the fortress's core. We need to keep those weapon systems from coming back online. The Allied fleet unleashed everything they had at the Nexus fortress. Xanthari crystal ships sang their battle songs as they poured harmonic energy into the enemy defenses. Delani bio ships fired living projectiles that ate through armor plating. Human warships used their most advanced weapons to target the fortress's critical systems. In the control chamber, Blake was fighting to stay conscious as she worked frantically at the alien controls. The weapon systems were fighting her attempts to shut them down, as if the ancient machinery had a will of its own. Supreme War Master Zethkoth advanced toward her, his weapon charging for a final shot that would kill her before she could complete the shutdown sequence. "Your species has caused enough damage to the natural order," he snarled. "It ends here." But before he could fire, Elder Vexithara appeared in the chamber doorway, his crystal form glowing with power. The Xanthari leader had followed Jake's assault team through the fortress and arrived just in time to see Blake's desperate struggle with the weapon controls. Vexithara raised his hands and began to sing, not the gentle melodies his people used for communication, but a piercing harmony that resonated with the fortress's crystal-based technology. The sound grew louder and more intense, causing the ancient control systems to vibrate in sympathy. The harmonic resonance overloaded several of the weapon's control circuits, giving Blake the opening she needed to complete the shutdown sequence. Her hands moved over the final controls as alarms screamed throughout the chamber. "Shutdown sequence initiated," she announced, then collapsed from her injuries. Zethkoth let out a roar of rage and fired his weapon, but the energy bolt struck only empty air. Elder Vexithara had thrown himself between the War Master and Blake, taking the full force of the attack. The elderly Xanthari fell to the chamber floor, his crystal skin cracking and losing its glow. But his sacrifice had given Blake the precious seconds she needed to complete her mission. The final purge weapon powered down with a sound like a dying giant. Throughout the fortress, systems began shutting down as the weapon's enormous power requirements were no longer being met. Outside in space, Admiral Carter watched her sensors as energy readings from the fortress dropped to safe levels. "The weapon is offline," she announced to the fleet. Blake did it, but the victory came at a terrible cost. The Nexus fortress was beginning to collapse as its ancient systems failed. The structure that had orbited the black hole for millennia was falling apart, and anyone still inside would be pulled into the gravitational well. "All teams, immediate evacuation," Carter ordered. "The fortress is breaking up." Jake Morrison and his assault team fought their way back through collapsing corridors, carrying wounded comrades and trying to reach the evacuation ships before the fortress's final destruction. In the control chamber, Blake struggled to her feet and looked down at Elder Vexithara's motionless form. The brave. The evacuation from the collapsing Nexus fortress was a desperate race against time and physics. As the ancient structure fell apart around the black hole, massive sections of hull plating and debris created a deadly storm of metal and energy that threatened every ship trying to escape the gravitational well. Captain Jake Morrison helped carry the wounded through corridors that groaned and twisted as the fortress's structural integrity failed. Behind them, they could hear the roar of atmosphere being sucked into space through hull breaches that grew larger with each passing second. "Move, move, move," Jake shouted to his mixed team of human Marines and Xanthari warriors. They were carrying Major Blake, who had lost consciousness from her injuries but was still alive. Elder Vexthera's body was wrapped in emergency blankets, the crystal form dim and lifeless. The evacuation ships were waiting at emergency docking ports that were barely holding together. Pilots from a dozen different species worked together to coordinate the rescue operation, their ships dodging falling debris as they pulled survivors from the dying fortress. Admiral Carter watched the evacuation from the bridge of the USS Liberty, her heart clenched with worry for the soldiers still trapped inside the structure. The fortress's collapse was accelerating, and soon the gravitational forces would be too strong for any ship to escape. "Admiral, we're detecting massive power surges from the remaining Vortak fleet," reported Commander Williams. "They're breaking formation and heading for hyperspace jump points. The destruction of the final purge weapon and the collapse of their greatest stronghold had broken the Vortak Empire's will to fight. Ships that had served the Empire for generations were abandoning their posts and fleeing into deep space. Some vessels were broadcasting surrender signals, while others simply disappeared into hyperspace without a word. Supreme War Master Zethkoth was among the last to escape the fortress, his personal command ship barely clearing the expanding debris field before the structure's core finally collapsed into the black hole. As his ship jumped to hyperspace, he transmitted a final message to the Allied fleet. "This victory means nothing, humans. The Vortak Empire spans 1,000 worlds. We will rebuild and we will return to complete the purification of this galaxy." But his words carried no conviction. The empire that had ruled through fear for millennia had been broken by the simple idea that different species could work together. For a common cause, Jake Morrison's evacuation ship was one of the last to clear the fortress before its final collapse. He stood at the observation window and watched as the massive structure, which had taken thousands of years to build, disappeared into the swirling accretion disk of the black hole. "It's over," he said quietly to himself. Then he looked around at the mixed crew of humans, Centauri, Delaney, and Crixthak, who had worked together to escape the dying fortress. "No, it's just beginning." 3 months after the Battle of Nexus, representatives from 47 liberated worlds gathered on Kepler Prime for the signing of the Galactic Alliance Charter. The crystal cities that had been reduced to rubble during the first Vortak attack had been rebuilt, stronger and more beautiful than before. Admiral Carter stood before the assembled delegates, looking out at faces from dozens of different species. Humans sat next to insectoid Crixthak, while aquatic Delaney delegates floated in specially designed tanks beside crystalline Centauri representatives. 6 months ago, most of our worlds had never heard of each other. Carter began her speech. We were scattered across the galaxy, each species fighting alone against an enemy that seemed invincible. Today, we stand together as proof that no tyranny can survive when free people unite against it. The charter that was signed that day established principles that would guide galactic civilization for generations to come. No species would be allowed to commit genocide against another. All intelligent life had the right to exist and develop according to its own nature. And most importantly, no world would ever stand alone against extinction again. Captain Jake Morrison, who had been promoted to admiral in recognition of his leadership during the Resistance, was appointed as the first director of Alliance Defense Forces. His job was to coordinate the military assets of member worlds, to prevent future conflicts and protect species that were threatened by aggression. Major Susan Blake, recovering from her injuries in a medical facility on Earth, was awarded the highest honors that dozens of worlds could bestow. Her actions in the Nexus Fortress control chamber had saved billions of lives and prevented the sterilization of entire star sectors. The Vortak Empire, meanwhile, had fragmented into dozens of smaller factions. Many of their former slave species had risen in rebellion, driving their oppressors from worlds that had been subjugated for generations. Some Vortak groups attempted to negotiate peace agreements with the Alliance, while others retreated to the far edges of the galaxy. A few individual Vortak even requested asylum in Alliance territory, claiming they had never supported their species' genocidal policies. These refugees were carefully screened and monitored, but many proved valuable in understanding the Empire's technology and helping to locate hidden weapons caches. The victory at Nexus had not ended the need for military vigilance, but it had fundamentally changed the balance of power in the galaxy. For the first time in millennia, aggressive species could not simply exterminate their neighbors without facing consequences from a united coalition of free worlds. 1 year after the signing of the Alliance Charter, memorial services were held on every member world to honor those who had died fighting for galactic freedom. On Kepler Prime, a crystal garden was planted in the ruins of the old embassy, where Jake Morrison had first made his desperate stand. Each tree in the memorial garden was grown from crystalline seeds, donated by the Centauri, and each one represented a different person who had given their life for the cause of freedom. The largest tree, planted in the center of the garden, was dedicated to Elder Vexithera, whose sacrifice in the fortress control chamber had made the final victory possible. Children from dozens of different species played among the memorial trees, their laughter mixing with the harmonic songs that the crystal formations produced when the wind blew through them. They were the first generation to grow up in a galaxy where different species were allies rather than enemies. At the main memorial ceremony on Earth, Admiral Carter delivered a speech that was broadcast to every world in Alliance space. Her words were translated into hundreds of languages and communication methods, ensuring that every species could understand the message. "We remember those who fought not for conquest or glory, but for the simple right of all species to exist," she said, standing before a wall that bore the names of every human who had died in the war. "They showed us that sometimes heroes really do fall from the sky when hope seems lost." The memorial wall continued beyond the human names to include representatives of every species that had fought in the Alliance. Xanthari names were inscribed in harmonic crystals that sang soft melodies when touched by sunlight. Delani heroes were honored with flowing water features that carried their names in bioluminescent script. Crixthak fallen were remembered through collective memory nodes that preserved their contributions to the hive consciousness. But the war's end had not brought perfect peace to the galaxy. New challenges emerged as the Alliance worked to integrate former Vortak territories and help rebuild worlds that had suffered under centuries of oppression. Some species struggled with the concept of cooperation after generations of serving authoritarian masters. Admiral Jake Morrison found himself dealing with these complex issues as he traveled between worlds, helping to establish new governments and training local defense forces. On the water world of Aquaros, he worked with Captain Julie Santos to help the Delani rebuild their ocean cities and restore the marine ecosystems that had been poisoned by Vortak mining operations. "The hardest part isn't the physical reconstruction," Julie told him as they watched Delaney engineers replanting coral reefs with new bioluminescent organisms. "It's helping people remember how to make their own decisions after being slaves for so long." On the Crixthak worlds in the Tartarus system, the situation was different but equally challenging. The insectoid species had maintained their collective consciousness even under Vortak rule, but they struggled to interact with species that made individual decisions rather than group choices. Clickrazor, now serving as the Crixthak ambassador to the Alliance, worked tirelessly to bridge the gap between his people's collective mindset and the individualistic approaches of other species. "We understand the concept of cooperation," he explained to Jake during one of their diplomatic meetings. "What we find difficult is the idea that individuals can disagree with group consensus and still work together effectively." Despite these challenges, the Alliance continued to grow stronger. New technologies emerged from the combination of different species' knowledge. Xanthari crystal technology merged with human quantum drives created ships that could travel faster and more efficiently than anything previously imagined. Delani bioengineering improved medical treatments for species throughout the galaxy, the MOS.